So we are now on chapter 10, the yoga of the intelligent will. Hmm. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Yeah. So today is one of the few days that we have an online presence, and just two people on site.
Oh, wow.
Mm. One, of course, is monk, and the other is Gita. So we start with this yoga of the intelligent will. I've had to deviate in the last two essays and to drag the reader with me into the arid tracks of metaphysical dogma, however cursorily and with a very insufficient and superficial treatment, so that we might understand why the Gita follows the peculiar line of development it has taken, working out first a partial truth with only subdued hints of its deeper meaning, then returning upon its hints and bringing out their significance until it rises to its last great suggestion, its supreme mystery, which it does not work out at all, but leaves to be lived out, as the later ages of Indian spirituality tried to live it out in great waves of love, of surrender, of ecstasy. Its eye is always on its synthesis, and all its strains are the gradual preparation of the mind for its high closing note. So here Sri Aurobindo acknowledges that the last two chapters that we finished reading were one, a kind of deviation from the text, but more importantly, were arid tracks of metaphysical dogma, and however superficially the treatment was given and so on. But what is more important is that he spells out here that the method in which the Gita progresses, and there it's very important to note that in the beginning, a partial truth with subdued hints of its deeper meaning are given in these chapters, and then at the end, the last great suggestion, its supreme mystery, which the Gita does not work out at all, but leaves to be lived out, is then given to the mind. So the gradual preparation of the mind is something that is very important to note when we are studying the Gita, because unlike any other text, it is a text of teaching of Sri Krishna to Arjuna, and he is preparing the disciple's mind to learn and to understand. And therefore, in a way, we are also being prepared to understand the deeper notes and the synthesis that the Gita is attempting. So, he continues, I have declared to you the poise of a self-liberating intelligence in Sankhya, says the divine teacher to Arjuna. I will now declare to you another poise in yoga. You are shrinking from the results of your work. You desire other results and turn from your right path in life because it does not lead you to them. Now, when you're hearing these words, please hear them not only as what Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna, but also what we ourselves tend to do in our own lives. So, this is again the divine teacher speaking to Arjuna, saying, I have I have explained to you the self-liberating intelligence, the poise of a self-liberating intelligence in Sankhya, and now I shall explain to you and declare to you another poise in yoga. Then he continues, you're shrinking from the results of your work. You desire other results. And so do all of us. We tend to do that in our own lives. It's good to reflect on that. You are shrinking from the results of your works. You desire other results and turn from your right path in life because it does not lead you to them. But this idea of works and their result, desire of result as the motive, the work as a means, but the satisfaction of desire is the bondage of the ignorant who know not what works are, nor their true source, nor their real operation, nor their high utility. My yoga, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, will free you from all bondage of the soul to its works. Karma bandham prahasyasi. So, Anuradha is online. Please, when we come to the Sanskrit sentences, do chip in to give the correct pronunciation, because I'm not good at that. Um, all right. So, my yoga will free you from all bondage of the soul to its works. And I suppose this is exactly straight from the text, which says, Karma bandham prahashyasi, you are afraid of many things, afraid of sin, afraid of suffering, afraid of hell and punishment, afraid of God, afraid of this world, afraid of the hereafter, afraid of yourself. What is it that you are not afraid of at this moment? You, the Aryan fighter, the world's chief hero. And this is something we can ask ourselves. But this is the great fear which besieges humanity. It's fear of sin and suffering now and hereafter. It's fear in a world of whose true nature it is ignorant, of a God whose true being also it has not seen, and whose cosmic purpose it does not understand. My yoga will deliver you from the great fear, and even a little of it will bring deliverance. When
Amita,
you have once, yes,
sorry, Amita, can I just add one very interesting point from Sri Aurobindo's Secret of the Vedas on the word Aryan?
yes, sure.
So, Sri Aurobindo in the Secret of the Vedas, he talks of the word Aryan because he's inviting us to become these Aryas. So there he says that it comes from the root Ar, and Ar has two meanings. One is to fight, like the real warrior. So there he says that self-perfection is the aim of his conquest. Therefore, what he conquers, he does not destroy, but ennobles and fulfills. He knows that the body, life, and mind are given him in order to attain to something higher than they. Therefore,
Mm,
they must be transcended and overcome, their
mm,
limitations denied, the absorption of their gratification rejected. For always the Aryan is a worker and warrior. He spares himself no labor of mind or body, whether to seek the highest or to serve it. He avoids no difficulty. He accepts no cessation from fatigue. Always he fights for the coming of that kingdom within himself and in the world. And in the next slide,
mm,
he says that Arya also comes from the root Ar, which means to cultivate. So he says, whoever cultivates the field that the Supreme Spirit has made for him, his earth of plenty within and without, does not leave it barren or allow it to seed, but labors to extract from it its full yield, is by that effort an Aryan. And finally, whoever thus aspires, labors, battles, travels, ascends the hill of being is the Aryan. Arya, Arya, Ari, with the various senses to toil, to fight, to climb, to rise, to travel, to prepare the sacrifice. For the work of the Aryan is a sacrifice, which is at once a battle and an ascent. a journey, a battle against the powers of darkness, an ascent to the highest peaks of the mountain beyond earth and heaven, into Swar, a journey to the other shore of the rivers and the ocean, into the furthest infinity of things.
Would it be possible to send this on the group, this passage?
I will send this. It's
WhatsApp
just
it?
these slides.
Okay.
I'll send the reference. I'll send it.
Yeah, you can send
I'll
the
do it.
reference or the slide
I'll
or
do it
the
just
yeah,
now.
the
I'll do it
text.
just now. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So that's important because all the time in the
Yes, he's
Gita,
referring to Aryan.
Shri Krishna is always reference to the Aryan, and we have unfortunately, very anglicized understanding of what the Aryan is. Of course, those of us who know, I've read Sri Aurobindo know this, but this is a rather well formulated explanation of the root of the word Aryan, which is interesting to note and to understand why he says, be an Aryan, Arya, and all the time he says, rise to your Aryan nature. And where actually the source of the root word Aryan came from, unlike as you know, the recent, well, not recent, but the, British and post and colonial theories that the Aryans were not did not were not part of India but came from abroad and came into India and conquered India. So all of that is debunked because, as you know, the Gita was written minimum 3,000 years ago, if not longer. So, or rather, not written, but yes, was said. So here we go. My yoga will deliver you from the great fear, and so on. When you have once set out on this path, you will find that no step is lost. Every least movement will be a gain. You will find there no obstacle that can balk you of your advance. A bold and absolute promise, and one to which the fearful and the hesitating mind, beset and stumbling in all its paths, cannot easily lend an assured trust. Nor is the large and full truth of it apparent unless with these first words of the message of the Gita we read also the last. So here Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, I will deliver you from the great fears that you have and bring you even a little of this yoga you practice will bring you deliverance. Very important, even a little. And then he goes on to say that not only the first part of what I will speak, but also the last. A bold and absolute promise, and one to which the fearful and the hesitating mind, beset and stumbling in all its paths, cannot easily lend an assured trust. Nor is there the large and full truth of it apparent, unless with these first words of the message of Gita we read also the last. Abandon all laws of conduct and take refuge in me alone. I will deliver you from all sin and evil. Do not grieve. But it is not with the deep and moving word of God to man, but rather with the first necessary rays of light on the path, directed not like that to the soul, but to the intellect, that the exposition begins. So again, the law of graduality, a very, very important feature in all of Indian yoga and spirituality, starts with the mind, the intellect. He appeals to the mind of Arjuna first, and then goes down to the heart and to the other parts of the being. So, not the so here, but rather with the first rays of light on the path, directed not like that to the soul, but to the intellect, that the exposition begins. Not the friend and lover of man speaks first, but the guide and teacher who has to remove from him his ignorance of his true self and of the nature of the world and of the springs of his own action. For it is because he acts ignorantly with a wrong intelligence and therefore a wrong will in these matters that man is or seems to be bound by his will. So why is man bound by his works? Because he acts ignorantly, one, with a wrong intelligence, and secondly, with the wrong will. Please note these two words, wrong intelligence and wrong will. In these matters, that man is or seems to be bound by his work. Otherwise, works are no bondage to the free soul. This is important because unlike all other, uh, you know, philosophies including the Sankhya, that says that you have to, in the sense, abandon works if you want realization. In in the Gita's yoga, in Sri Krishna's yoga, works are no bondage to the free soul, but the problem is in the wrong intelligence and wrong will. It is because of this wrong intelligence that he has hope and fear, wrath and grief, and transient joy. Otherwise, works are possible with a perfect serenity and freedom. Therefore, it is the yoga, therefore, it is the yoga of the buddhi, the intelligence, that is first enjoined on Arjuna to act with right intelligence and therefore a right will. Fixed in the one, aware of the one self in all, and acting out of its equal serenity, not running about in different directions under the thousand impulses of our superficial mental self, is the yoga of the intelligent will. So these lines, to act with the right, please mark those. This, in sum, defines what uh, is called and described as the yoga of the intelligent will, starting from the mind and the intellect. There are, says the Gita, two types of intelligence in the human being. The first is concentrated, poised. The first is concentrated, poised, one, directly directed singly towards the truth. Unity is its characteristic. Concentrated fixity is its very being. Let's tell him to go. No, no, tell him to go. He's getting upset. He wants to listen to the Gita and not go for his food. So, sorry, he's very clear about where he wants to be. All right, he's ignored his food and wants to sit here. All right, there we are. The first is concentrated. There are two types of intelligence in the human. Now, this is a general exposition on the intelligence of the human being. One, the concentrated, poised, homogeneous, directed singly towards the truth. Unity is its characteristic, concentrated fixity is its very being. In the other, there is no single will, no unified intelligence, but only an endless number of ideas, many branching, coursing about, that is to say, in this or that direction, in pursuit of the desires which are offered to it by life and by the environment. Buddhi, the word used, means properly speaking, the mental power of understanding, but it is evidently used by the Gita in a large philosophic sense for the whole action of the discriminating and deciding mind, which determines both the direction and use of our thoughts and the direction and use of our acts. So, buddhi is not just the mental power of understanding, but also in the Gita, it is used for the whole action of the discriminating and deciding mind, which determines both the direction and use of our thoughts, and direction and use of our acts. Thought, intelligence, judgment, perceptive choice, and aim are all included in its functioning. For the characteristic of the unified intelligence is not only concentration of the mind, but that knows, but especially concentration of the mind that decides and persists in the decision. Vyavashya. Any thought, any comment there, Anuradha, on this, on buddhi? Because I know there are a lot of layers of the buddhi. So, so this is what buddhi is described in the Gita, and the way that Sri Krishna is using buddhi when he is explaining to Arjuna the how to do the yoga of the intellect, of the intelligent will, which the intellect which has two aspects in it. What are the two aspects he talked about? Anyone? Will, and we just spoke about it here. It's very important.
Intelligence and will.
Intelligence and will, yes. So the intellect and will. Now, the unified intelligent will is fixed in the enlightened soul. So here are the two things. While the sign of the, no, let me continue that again. Decides and persists in the decision, while the sign of the dissipated intelligence is not so much even discursiveness of the ideas and perceptions as discursiveness of the aims and desires, therefore of the will. Will, then, and knowledge are the two functions of the buddhi. The unified, intelligent will is fixed in the enlightened soul. It is concentrated in inner self-knowledge, the many branching and multifarious, busied with many things, careless of the one thing needful, is on the contrary, careless of the one thing needful, is on the contrary subject to the restless and discursive action of the mind, dispersed in outward life and works and their fruits. Works are far inferior, says the teacher, to yoga of the intelligence. Desire rather refuge in the intelligence. Poor and wretched souls are they who make the fruit of their works the object of their thoughts and activities. Well, it includes more than three parts of humanity, unfortunately. So here Sri Krishna makes a comment on to Arjuna about, firstly, intelligence is more superior than works. But what kind of works? Poor subject. Works are far inferior, says the teacher, to yoga of the intelligence. Not just intelligence, yoga of the intelligence. So that is a conscious, this is where the intellect and the will are unified. And it is the yoga of the intelligence. Desire rather refuge in the intelligence. And then he says, poor and wretched souls are they, like all of us, who make the fruit of their works the object of their thoughts and activities. So please note this. Now, this immediately changes, and when you apply this to yourself, you begin to understand what Sri Krishna is actually slowly telling Arjuna, that move into the intelligent, go into the buddhi, sit in your intelligent self, in the intelligent soul, which knows and which can direct, which has the power of both the intellect, the discriminating mind, the inner mind, and also the will. And don't be so outward in your outer consciousness that your whole object of or every of your works, of all that you do, is on the results and the object, the fruit of your works. So right now, everything we do is related to uh, what fruit that will bring us. Now, that fruit could be income, it could be finance, it could be um, fame, it could be name. What are the other fruits of works that we as human beings desire and work toward? Why do we work? Why do we work? I'm asking you.
To,
Why do you work?
we work also to progress in whatever field that we have chosen.
Yes. Now, when you work to progress in whatever field you choose, that is a higher kind of work. That is a work that is done for growth and progress. It is still higher, but what is the most elementary, basic reason that man works?
To satisfy
To,
desire.
to live, no, to make a living, to live in this world. I mean, it's a very practical, very important thing, and you can't do away with it. And neither is Sri Krishna telling Arjuna to do away with that. Because to live in this world, how are you going to put a roof over your head, put dinner on the table, and how are you going to enjoy a prosperous life unless you work? And if you work, what are you working for? So these are, but then what happens to that work? You start with the necessity, and then slowly that work changes. From necessity, it becomes something else. Even in the spiritual life, you have to be very careful. Yes, you can say that we work to progress, but even that progress, you have to be very careful. When you teach, sometimes the ego comes in. Again, the same movements come because unregenerate human nature is there. So to be able to even progress, there has to be the spiritual ego that comes in. So that it just transfers from the material ego to the spiritual ego. So there is this very, very important point here that Sri Krishna is making, which we need to understand and see and reflect on. So let me again, and then of course it gives you the way out. But unless you fully embrace the problem, fully delve into the how critical the question and the issue that Sri Krishna is bringing up to Arjuna is. Unless you could cross like and leave it all and not realize how important it is. So he is trying to explain something to Arjuna here and to all of us. Works are far inferior, says the teacher, to yoga of the intelligence. Desire rather refuge in the intelligence. Poor and wretched soul. Again, this is graduality. Huh? The first area, first principles. Then they change. Poor and wretched souls are they who make the fruit of their works the object of their thoughts and activities. Close inverted commas. Direct quote from the Gita, which in Sanskrit we will perhaps take up after we read this chapter. We should read the original Sanskrit, which Anuradha will read for us next time.
Amitaji,
We can't finish this time. Yes,
Amitaji,
Anuradha.
sorry, can
Yes.
I just add one other thing? So just in the sequence of manifestation in Sankhya, we have buddhi and then followed by ahankara, and the manas is just one manifested part of that, evolute of that. So buddhi still remains within the alignment of the higher truth. So it's still with Purusha comes in connection with Prakriti. Buddhi still remains at that point, and it is a discretionary intelligence, as it is said here. And then Manas, the very quality of Manas is that it is always bound by the duality of things. It is
Thing.
not bound by the truth of things. It is caught up in the duality of expressions. And
Separate.
it works on the basis of reasoning, just in this context of the Manas and all. And in the Sankhya itself, so in the Yoga Sutra, which is a corollary of the Sankhya philosophy, so they talk of something called Ishvara. the concept of Ishvara, who is a master, and which is what he's saying, that you don't get caught up by the works. So he says that all our actions, and Ishvara is one who has overcome the churnings or the outcomes of klesha, karma, vipaka. So every time we act, we are gathering things we are adding to the filters of our experience of life, because we get more and more caught up in acting. So the intelligence here that Sri Aurobindo is referring to, and that Shri Krishna is saying, is how can within the acting we remain with the being. So it is not what happens, but what we have learned from what happens that really is of value to the growth of the soul. Not how much of whatever action we have undertaken or achieved, or all of that is of no real consequence. What would eventually matter is within that action, how have we grown to uplift our soul towards our own truth. So that's why intelligence, he prioritizes intelligence over the works here.
Yes, yes. So we must remember the psychological order of the Sankhya, which the Gita accepts. This is what you spoke about, Anuradha. On one side, there is the Purusha, the soul, calm, inactive, immutable, one, not evolutive. On the other side, there is Prakriti, or nature force, inert, without the conscious soul, active, but only by juxtaposition to that consciousness, by contact with it, as we would say, not so much one at first as not so much one at first as indeterminate, triple in its qualities, capable of evolution and involution. So, so again, Sri Aurobindo is hearkening back to the Sankhya Yoga, which the Gita accepts of the Purusha and the Prakriti, and the two natures and the two different, and the juxtaposition between the two. So, triple in its qualities, capable of evolution and involution. The contact of soul and nature, which is
Can I
Purusha.
ask a question? Sorry, I don't mean to
Yes,
interrupt, but can I ask a question before we move on to the next idea?
yes, please.
The question is, he says, not so much one at first as indeterminate. How is nature indeterminate? What does he mean by that? Is there a determinism in nature? Why is it indeterminate then?
Anuradha, would you like to answer that?
Yes. Can you just, sorry, repeat the exact question?
Repeat the question.
I'm just trying to find it exactly here. Indeterminate triple.
Okay.
So he says that, yes, please.
My question is, why does he say nature is indeterminate? Or is it only in the Sankhya that nature is indeterminate? Because elsewhere, Sri Aurobindo talks about the determinism of nature.
Yes. So the thing is that in Sankhya philosophy, nature or Prakriti is regarded as being jada, unconscious. And she's one. Purushas are many, but Prakriti is just one unconscious force. And it is only when she comes in contact with Purusha does evolution begin, or the involution in that sense begin. So in that sense, indeterminate, because there is no distinction in the way Prakriti operates in the Sankhya philosophy. And she's unconscious. She's jada.
Yes, yes. You just talk about that. Okay, thank you. It's clearer now. Thank you.
The contact of soul and nature generates the play of subjectivity and objectivity. which is our experience of being. So the contact of soul and nature. What is soul? Purusha and Prakriti generates the play of subjectivity and objectivity, which is our experience of being. What is to us the subjective first evolves, because the soul consciousness is the first cause. So, what is to us the subjective first evolves, because the soul consciousness is the first cause. Inconscient nature force, only the second and dependent cause. But still, it is nature and not soul which supplies the instruments of our subjectivity. First, in order, come buddhi, discriminative or determinative power evolving out of nature force, and its subordinate power of self-discriminating ego. Then, as a secondary evolution, there arises out of these the power which seizes the discriminations of objects, sense mind, or manas. We must record. So here is the evolutionary, or in whatever order that of how it comes. So I think again Anuradha described that the buddhi is the highest, the purusha. Sits from there comes the discriminating ego. From there, then is a secondary evolution that arises out of the out of these the power which seizes the discriminations of objects through the sense mind or manas. We must record the Indian names because the corresponding English words are not real equivalents. As a tertiary evolution, that is a third evolution, out of the sense mind or manas, we have the specializing organic senses, 10 in number, 5 of perception, 5 of action. So, what are these 10 in number organic senses? Next, the powers of each sense of perfection. Before we go there, would you know what these 10 in number are? The organic senses, 10 in number,
We
5 of
have
perception, 5 of action, the Sanskrit words.
so we have the jnanendriyas on one side and the karmendriyas, the actions of the first ones are the senses that we have. So all the ears, eyes, all the senses, sense organs are the what do you say, senses of knowledge, jnanendriya.
So, yeah, the Gyanendra senses of knowledge.
Yes.
And so there
So
are two. There are 5 of
kar-
perception and 5 of action. And
yes.
the other ones are the action ones.
Karmendriya are the action ones, and they are speech, action, so walking,
That's right.
action, then the rejection of the body in the reproductory and the excretory.
So next, the powers of each sense of perception, sound, form, scent, etc. So these are the 5 of this of perception, sound, form, scent, etc., which give their value to objects for the mind and what make things what they are to our subjectivity. And as the substantial basis of these, the primary conditions of the objects of sense, the 5 elements of ancient philosophy, or rather elementary conditions of nature, Panchabhuta, which constitute objects by their various combinations. So, what is this Panchabhuta?
Panchabhuta are the 5 elements:
So, water,
water,
fire,
yeah,
ether,
yes,
earth.
water, fire,
These 5 elements of
space, I
ancient
mean,
philosophy
wind and space, air and space.
constitute objects by their various combinations. So, I think here what Sri Aurobindo is explaining is the different, he's going down the ladder from the buddhi to the discriminating ego to manas, and then to the in within manas the tertiary evolution third of sense mind of manas in two different are 10 in number, that is the organic senses he calls specializing, which are 5 of perception, which is the sound, form, scent, and 5 of action, which is the karmane, what do you call it?
Karmendriya. Karma, Indriya.
Karma
Indriya
indriya,
senses.
karma
Yeah.
indriya, which is of which are what are the karma
They are
indriya?
the ones are Pani, hand, Pada, feet, speech, Vak. Payu is elimination through the anal tract, and procreatory juices are the Upastha.
So these are the five that he's mentioning. So the five of perception, five of action, which are and then jnana indriyas and karma indriyas, and then after that he goes on to the panchabhuta, which is the five elements
Atma.
which make all of which are used in various combinations. Now, reflected in the pure consciousness of Purusha, reflected in the pure consciousness of Purusha, these degrees and powers of nature force become, these degrees and powers of nature force is what? Prakriti, become the material of our impure subjectivity. Please note this line. Impure because its action is dependent on the perceptions of the objective world and on their subjective reactions. So, reflected in the pure consciousness of Purusha, these degrees and powers of nature force, which we've just spoken of above, become the material of our impure subjectivity. Impure because its action is dependent on the perceptions of the objective world and on their subjective reactions. Buddhi, which is simply the determinative power that determines all inertly out of indeterminate, inconscient force, takes for us the form of intelligence and will. So, Buddhi takes on the form of intelligence and will, which is basically, what is Buddhi? Simply the determinative power that determines all inertly out of indeterminate, inconscient force, takes for us the form of intelligence and will. Manas, the inconscient power, force, which seizes nature's discriminations by objective action and reaction and grasps at them by attraction, becomes sense, perception, and desire. So manas becomes what? Sense, perception, and desire through the five senses and desire. The two crude terms or degradations of intelligence. So please note the two crude terms or degradations of intelligence and will, the Buddha, becomes, so these, the two crude terms of a degradation of intelligence becomes the sense mind, sensational, emotive, volitional in the lower sense of wish, hope, longing, passion, vital impulsion, all the deformations of will. All the deformations of will, vikara. So would you like to say anything on this, on the Sanskrit terminology especially and understanding? So let me finish this few lines and then you can speak, Anuradha. The senses become the instruments of sense mind. So what happens to the senses? They become the instruments of manas. Okay? The perceptive five of our sense knowledge. The active five of our impulsions and vital habits. Mediators between the subjective and objective. The rest are the objects of our consciousness. Vivashyas, vishyas,
Vishaya. Vishaya.
vishaya of the
Vishaya is the
senses,
objects. Yeah.
objects of the senses. Okay. Would you
Yes.
like to comment, Anuradha?
Yes. So if I can just share here, what happens is that the in the if you I have also shared the document. I've shared the chart of the Sankhya on the group. So if you look at it, you will see that Buddhi is within the descent. When there is a descent uh, of the association of Purusha with Prakriti, before there is a divisioning out, separation out, Buddhi comes at a stage prior to that. Manas has already come into the partial expression, and it is now trying to make sense of the world around it. And it does it through two. As he said, there is the senses of perception, so the Gyanendriyas,
Yeah.
through all the senses. The senses themselves do not, they just they are just gateways for the input of the information from the external world. And what is it that propels us towards action through the hand, feet, all of that is the subjectivized deformations of the original will and the intelligence. So in the understanding of the relationship between sense object, action, so there is actually a very nice kind of a schema. If there is a whiteboard here, can I use the whiteboard and show it? It'll make it very easy to understand.
Anuradha, are you
Can I use
home?
the whiteboard on this? Like there is a
Yeah,
whiteboard.
yeah, you can if you want to.
Can you just see
But
the
we don't know.
whiteboard? Can everybody see the whiteboard? Yes?
Yes.
So if for example, if this is the human system, let's say if this is the human system here, that's the mind stuff here. Okay, this is the mind stuff. We have the senses. Let's say I'll just give one example. So that's the eyes. Okay, and you've got all the different senses that will come under there. Now the senses, or this is the indriya, this is the jnanendriya, are attached to their sense objects, which is the vishaya. So let's say I'm just making a flower here.
So give us examples of Vishayas.
Vishaya means the objects. Vishaya basically means object. So the eye grasps the sense object. So senses and sense objects are normally closely associated. Okay, so the eye is grasping the sense object and it is getting transferred into the mind. And then this is like what I say. So this is the input part of it. What we have here is the input. Sorry. We have the input. This part, the mind, is the processor. I'll just write it in brief. You have the processor and then you have the output. If you have to see it like a system. Okay. And so in the output, you've got thought, sorry, and speech and action. These are the outputs. So what they're saying is that if the mind is in its confusions, and that is what we will see later on in the Gita also, the mind itself can either be very messed up, which is the tamas quality. It can either be very dynamic, but still with a lot of movement, which is the rajas, and it can either be completely in alignment, which is the sattva. So this is the largest schema of the Sankhyan worldview, that the
So we
senses are drawn outward because the mind is captured by the externalities of existence, by what Prakriti is offering it. So unless the mind is turning inward and upward to the Purusha, it is detaching itself. So when the eye is getting absorbed usually by the sense object. Indriya and Indriya Vishaya, these two are attached.
yes.
And because they're getting attached, it causes the turbulence within. And when it causes turbulence within, then action takes place. Action, speech, thoughts, all of them happen. So when this is weakened, that the eye will still see but not allow it to get into the noisy or the tamasic mode, but look at it in connection with the Purusha, then one can still act, but one will act with the intelligence and will of the Purusha rather than the ignorance of Prakriti.
Now, let me just read that again so that the second reading can, the thought can filter in. reflected in the pure consciousness of Purusha, these degrees and powers of nature force, Prakriti, become the material of our impure subjectivity, impure because its action is dependent on the perceptions of the objective world and on their subjective reactions. Buddhi, which is simply the determinative power that determines all inertly out of indeterminate inconscient force, takes for us the form of intelligence and will. Manas, the inconscient force, which seizes nature's discriminations by objective action and reaction and grasps at them by attraction, becomes sense perception and desire. The two crude terms or degradations of intelligence and will becomes the sense mind, sensational, emotive, volitional, in the lower sense of wish, hope, longing, passion, vital impulsion, all the deformations, vikara of will. The senses become the instruments of sense mind, the perceptive five of our sense knowledge, and the perceptive five of our sense knowledge, the active five of our impulsions and vital habits, mediators between the subjective and objective. The rest are the mediators, the rest are the objects of our consciousness, vishayas of the senses, vishayas of the senses. This order of evolution seems contrary to that which we perceive as the order of the material evolution. So this order uh, that the Gita puts forth seems to be, or the Sankhya, which Sri Krishna puts forth, is opposite of our material evolution. But if we remember that even buddhi is in itself an inert action of inconscient nature, and that there is certainly in this sense an inconscient will and intelligence, a discriminative and determinative force, even in the atom. If we observe the crude, inconscient stuff of sensation, emotion, memory, impulsion in the plant, and in the subconscious forms of existence, if we look at these powers of nature force, assuming the forms of our subjectivity in the evolving consciousness of animal and man, we shall see that the Sankhya system squares well enough with all that modern inquiry has elicited by its observation of material nature. In the evolution of the soul back from Prakriti towards Purusha, the reverse order has to be taken to the original nature evolution. And that is how the Upanishads in the Gita, following and almost quoting the Upanishads, state the ascending order of our subjective powers. Supreme in quotations, supreme, they say, beyond their objects are the senses. Supreme over the senses, the mind. Supreme over the mind, the intelligent will. That which is supreme over the intelligent will is He, is the conscious self, the Purusha. Therefore, says the Gita, it is this Purusha, this supreme cause of our subjective life, which we have to understand and become aware of. So this, it therefore, says the Gita, it is this Purusha, this supreme cause of our subjective existence, this supreme cause of our subjective life, which we have to understand and become aware of by the intelligence. In that we have to fix our will. So holding our lower subjective self in nature firmly poised and stilled by means of the greater, really conscious self, we can destroy the restless, ever active enemy of our peace and self mastery. So we can destroy the restless, ever active enemy of our peace and self mastery, the mind's desire. So, this is the way to destroy the mind's desire. By doing what? Supreme, they say, beyond. So it says by um, by stilling the outer mind, the manas, the sensory mind, and establishing and becoming established in the purusha, which is the higher intelligence of the buddhi, and being firmly poised and stilled by means of the greater, really conscious self, we can destroy the restless, ever active enemy of our peace and self mastery, the mind's desire. So, if you even notice in Sri Aurobindo and the mother's yoga, the mother's words always, she always says, first establish calm equality. So, that is the basis of all yoga. Sri Aurobindo considers, equality, calmness, establishing peace in the mind. There is this wonderful meditation, establishing peace in the mind and the cells of the body. Why do we meditate? So this is what Sri Krishna is here trying to say, that go into that meditative self of the inner consciousness and still your mind, the outer sensory mind. Go and then rise above in the buddhi and sit in the stillness of the Purusha. And there, when you have that descent of peace into the mind, the descent of equality, equanimity, then only can you rise into the buddhi, into the Purusha, which is the intelligent. And there then you can apply the will, the intelligent will. The importance of the will and what is this will is extremely important in the practice of this Sankhya Yoga. Is there anything on that that anyone can illuminate on the will part of this? Okay. So we stay with Sri Aurobindo's words. Long and yeah, moving conditions. So, this really brings you to something very important. Um, the importance of concentration, meditation, stillness, inwardization. I'm talking now about the practical parts of, of being, because if this philosophy is not practiced, we don't start working on that. This becomes only intellectual, um, you know, an intellectual understanding. Um, how and therefore, if you see, um, the time that one has to give to meditation is extremely important. When we lose that practice of meditation, concentration, inwardization, sitting in the Purusha and ascending in our consciousness and descending the peace first and equanimity into our being, that practice really gives you the key to what the Gita and what Sri Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna here. Um, and this is, of course, through the intellect. Now, there are other paths. This is not the only way, and the mother has given other paths too. But this is a very important practice, because anyone who is doing yoga and wants to start doing work as without uh, attachment and without attachment to the fruits of work needs to have some form of this yoga of the intelligent will, needs to practice some form of this. So, for evidently, there are two possibilities of the action of the intelligent will. So, shall we take this up next time? Because maybe we end here today. And we take up the next, because in any case we can't finish this. And it's a long chapter. Um, yes, is that all right? Should we continue next time? And maybe we can read this for ourselves again before the next class, or and meditate on it, and spend this week trying to do some Sankhya Yoga. Okay, the practice. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
And should we end with a bit of meditation? So let us meditate, this time in silence, and put a sankalp, the will. Let us put our inner will into finding time this week to practice stillness, inwardization, and reading this with the idea of understanding the practice of Sankhya Yoga. We were on the chapter, the Yoga of the Intelligent Will. So I'll take the last paragraph just to keep the continuity. This order of evolution seems contrary to that which we perceive as the order of the material evolution. But if we remember that even buddhi is in itself an inert action of inconscient nature, and there is certainly, in this sense, an inconscient will and intelligence, a discriminative and determinative force, even in the atom. If we observe the crude inconscient stuff of sensation, emotion, memory, impulsion in the plant and in the subconscious forms of existence, if we look at these powers of nature force, assuming the forms of our subjectivity in the evolving consciousness of animal and man, we shall see that the Sankhya system squares well enough with all that modern inquiry has elicited by its observation of material nature. In the evolution of the soul back from Prakriti towards Purusha, the reverse order has to be taken to the original nature evolution. And that is how the Upanishads and the Gita, following and almost quoting the Upanishads, say the ascending order of our subjective powers. Almost quoting the Upanishad state, the ascending order of our subjective powers. Supreme, they say, beyond their objects are the senses. Supreme over the senses, the mind. Supreme over the mind, the intelligent will. That which is supreme over the intelligent will is He, is the conscious self, the Purusha. Therefore, says the Gita, it is this Purusha, this supreme cause of our subjective life, which we have to understand and become aware of by the intelligence. In that, we have to fix our will, so holding our lower subjective self in nature, so holding our lower subjective self in nature firmly poised and stilled by means of the greater really conscious self, we can destroy the restless, ever activity enemy of our peace and self-mastery, the mind's desire. So here is um, the way that the Sankhya Yoga proceeds, and in a way it squares well with the way that um, that the Upanishads and the Gita too proceed, especially is the ascending order of our subjective powers. So, what is the ascending order of our subjective powers? One, the senses are the lower, then the mind, then over the mind is the intelligent will, then over the intelligent will is he, that is the conscious self or the Purusha. And therefore, the Gita says that it is this Purusha, this supreme cause of our subjective life that we have to understand and become aware of by the intelligence. In that, we have to fix our will. So, holding this subjective self in nature firmly poised and stilled by means of the greater, really conscious self, we can destroy the restless, ever activity enemy of our peace and self mastery. And what is this restless, ever activity? The mind's desire. For evidently, now this is where we stopped last time. So from here we begin today, page 98 for those who joined. For evidently, there are two possibilities of the action of the intelligent will. It may take its downward and outward orientation towards a discursive action of the perceptions and the will in the triple play of Prakriti, or it may take its upward and inward orientation towards a settled peace and equality in the calm and immutable purity of the conscious silent soul, no longer subject to the distractions of nature. So there are two possibilities of the action of the intelligent will. What are the two possibilities? One, it may take its upward and inward orientation towards a settled peace and equality, or two, a discursive action of the perceptions and the will in the triple play of Prakriti. What does this mean, a discursive action of the perceptions and the will in the triple play of Prakriti? Anyone?
So,
Yes, Anuradha?
understand is the triple play is Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, the three gunas. And this,
Yes.
because it's not a focused, we keep moving from one to the other and it's outwardized, not connected to the inner.
Yes, and so the triple play of Prakriti is the outer nature of the tamas, rajas, and sattva. So there are two possibilities of the action of the intelligent will. Mostly, if we notice, our intelligent will is mostly in this discursive action of the perceptions and the will in the triple play of Prakriti. However, it needs to turn towards the upward and inward orientation, which is towards a settled peace and equality in the calm and immutable purity of the conscious, silent soul, no longer subject to the distractions of nature. So, this is what the Sankhya Yoga helps us to do, the second. In the former alternative, which is the first one, which is the discursive action, the subjective being is at the mercy of the objects of sense. It lives in the outward contact of things. So when we say that the subjective being is at the mercy of the objects of sense, what are the five senses? What we see, what we desire, and of course the mind's desire. Yeah, the outer, yeah. So the indriyas and also the mental, the way that it catches things. So that is what it is. In the former alternative, the subjective being is at the mercy of these objects of sense. It lives in the outward contact of things. That life is the life of desire. Simply put, that life is the life of desire. For the senses, excited by their objects, create a restless or often violent disturbance, a strong or even headlong outward movement towards the seizure of these objects and their enjoyment, and they carry away the sense mind as the winds carry away a ship upon the sea. This is a direct quote from that verse in the Gita. As the winds carry away a ship upon the sea, the mind subjected to the emotions, passions, longings, impulsions awakened by this outward movement of the senses carries away similarly the intelligent will, which loses therefore its power of calm discrimination and mastery. Subjection of the soul to the confused play of the three gunas of Prakriti, tamas, rajas, and sattva, in their eternal entangled twinning and wrestling, ignorance, a false, sensuous, objective life of the soul, enslavement to grief and wrath, and attachment and passion are the results of the downward trend of the buddhi. So there is the upward trend of the buddhi, which is the movement of fixing your consciousness and will to above the mind, above the chakra of the Sahasrara chakra, and opening to the light that is coming from above, the light of the divine presence, the light of the divine illumination, inward and upwards. Then there is the other side, which is the normal, ordinary way that our consciousness functions, which is the outward nature, which is subject to the three gunas, and there the soul of desire, the mental seizing upon objects and the dwelling on them, and then the excitement, the wrath, the grief, the passions, the movement, the restlessness, those are the symptoms of the outer nature that is subject to that. So there are two movements. So he's very clearly distinguishing between this. And don't forget, these are all Sanskrit shlokas that are being recited by Sri Krishna on the battlefield to Arjuna. He's explaining this to him. So the second are the results of the downward trend of the buddhi, the troubled life of the ordinary, unenlightened, undisciplined man. Those So once we understand this, the first thing is the mind and the consciousness and our being needs to clearly and precisely understand this human psychology, the way that our being moves, and then we have to put our will and our effort into the inward and upward tendency rather than the outward tendency, which is the indriya through the senses, through the sense mind, through the sense objects, and through the wrath and passions. And you see how 80% of our life is in the outward nature, and how much neither does our education help us to uh, do this, to do this to become more inwardized or reach upward and get illuminated, and neither does the environment support it. So this is why this teaching of the Gita is still not entered into our universities, our classrooms, our daily life. So those who like the now, um, right. So this is an extremely important paragraph which explains this. That life is the life of desire. And then it goes on subjection of the soul to the confused play of the three gunas of Prakriti in the eternal entangled, a twinning and wrestling, ignorance, a false, sensuous, objective life of the soul, enslavement to grief and wrath, attachment and passion are the results of the downward trend of the Prithvi, the troubled life of the ordinary, unenlightened, undisciplined man. Those who like the Veda Vadins make sense enjoyment the object of action. Veda Vadins who make sense enjoyment the object of action and its fulfillment the highest aim of the soul are misleading guides. The inner subjective self-delight, independent of objects, is our true aim and the high and wide point of our liberation and peace. So this self-delight, this delight in oneself, the inner rasa that is not dependent on outer stimulation, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna here, is the inner subjective self-delight, independent of objects. Independent is our true aim and high and wide poise of our peace and liberation. Therefore, it is the upward and inward orientation of the intelligent will that we must resolutely choose with a settled concentration and perseverance. Vya vasas, va, vasasya. So this is the inner, we must always choose, but with a settled concentration and perseverance, the inward orientation of the intelligent will that we must choose. We must fix it firmly in the calm self-knowledge of the Purusha. The first movement must be obviously to get rid of desire, which is the whole root of the evil and suffering. And in order to get rid of desire, we must put an end to the cause of desire, the rushing out of the senses to seize and enjoy their objects. So, what is the cause of desire? It is the rushing out of the senses to seize and enjoy their objects. We must draw them back. So, what do we have to first do? We have to draw back our own senses. When they rush out, it's like the tortoise, kulmo angani sarvashe, indriyani indriyakepya, tasya pragya pratishtata. So, in that one verse, what Sri Krishna says is that like a tortoise that draws back into itself its legs, in the same way we have to draw back into ourselves all our sensory movements that tend to rush for out. So the first movement must be obviously. Now this is extremely important because it's not only very practical, but it is also the method of yoga. Not only the method of the yoga of the Gita, but also the yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the yoga of Sri Krishna. Or this particular thing is similar and is the same in all the three yogas: the yoga of the Gita, the yoga of the Sankhya yoga, and the integral yoga. So the first movement must be obviously to get rid of desire, which is the whole root of the evil and suffering. And in order to get rid of desire, we must put an end to the cause of desire, the rushing out of the senses to seize and enjoy their objects. We must draw them back when they are inclined thus to rush out, draw them away from their objects, as the tortoise draws in his limbs into the shell. So these into their source, quiescent in the mind quiescent in intelligence, the intelligence quiescent in the soul and its self-knowledge, Purusha, observing the action of nature Prakriti, but not subject to it, not desiring anything that the objective life can give. It is not an external asceticism. The physical renunciation of the objects of sense that I am teaching, suggests Krishna, immediately to avoid a misunderstanding, which is likely at once to arise. Not the renunciation of the Sankhyas or the austerities of the rigid ascetic with his fasts, his maceration of the body, his attempt to abstain even from food. That is not the self discipline or the abstinence which I mean, for I speak of an inner withdrawal, a renunciation. So it is not an external asceticism. It is the renunciation of desire. It is an inner renunciation. It is not an outer renunciation. It is not by doing fasts and making yourself torturing the body or uh, you know the asceticism that comes with the outer renunciation. That is not the self-discipline or the abstinence which I mean. For I speak of an inner withdrawal, a renunciation of desire. The embodied soul, having a body, has to support it, normally by food, for its normal physical action. By abstention from food, it simply removes from itself the physical contact with the object of sense, but does not get rid of the inner relation which makes that contact hurtful. It retains the pleasure of the sense in the object, the rasa, the liking and disliking. The rasa has two sides. The soul must, on the contrary, be capable of enduring the physical contact without suffering inwardly this sensuous reaction. Otherwise, there is nivriti, cessation of the object. Vivashya vinivartante, but no subjective cessation, no nivriti of the mind. But the senses are of the mind, subjective, and subjective cessation of the rasa is the only real sign of mastery. So now let's take this up again. Because this is in one of the most important pillars of the yoga of the Gita that Sri Krishna teaches.
Ma'am,
Yes, go ahead. Where are you? Yes, Anushka.
ma'am, I came across till now I thought the meaning of Nivriti was bliss. So
What?
this bliss, BLISS. So
Hmm.
then the cessation of the objects, or uh, does that equate to bliss then? That if you're, calm, or if your senses, your desires and your senses are sort of muted, and so then you're in a place of bliss because you're not feeling the turmoil of happiness, sadness, or the
You're not in that, yes, you're not in the yo-yo movement of one extreme into the other extreme and so on. So it's, yes, everything self-delight, what he mentions earlier, that self-delight that comes, that is liberty, that comes from a sense of enjoying not the rasa of the of which is due to the rushing out of the senses, but the inwardization of the consciousness upon itself, enjoying it but not being disturbed or excited, grieved, or not going into extreme emotion or passion, but being in a state of inner calm. So it's the inner movement. And when you have that inwardization, whenever you're inwardized, it doesn't mean that you don't enjoy. It doesn't mean that you give up everything and you lead a life of renunciation. You may enjoy everything, but you take an inner, you with your will and your intelligence. You take an inner poise of consciousness, and or an inner and upper poise of consciousness. So when you do that, you enjoy without getting attached or subject to uh, the
Consequences or the effects of it.
yes.
Thank
You
you.
don't lose your discrimination.
Thank you.
So um, I want to read this out again because it's very important. I just want to read it once more. We must draw them back. So we must not put an end to the cause of desire, which is what the rushing out of the senses to seize and enjoy their object. So this rushing out of the senses to seize and enjoy the objects, instead of that, when there is something, instead of the rushing out, you pull your senses in, and the inner rasa, the inner enjoyment, without the being subject to the dualities, then takes place. It's a self delight that then happens. So like we must draw them back when they are inclined thus to rush out, draw them away from their objects, as the tortoise draws in his limbs into the shell. These into their source, quiescent in the mind quiescent in the intelligence quiescent in the soul, and its self-knowledge, observing the action of nature, but not subject to it, not desiring anything that the objective life can give. So when you become a slave of something, that's what it's saying. Not subject to something means not subject to you are not uh, you're not bound by it. You're not a slave of it. You may at any moment in that self-delightful state give it up or enjoy it. That that is what Sri Krishna is gradually taking Arjuna towards. It is not an external asceticism that we've read. And then he gives example of that. Then he says, it retains the pleasure of the sense in the object. Now, this is again important. The embodied soul, having a body, has to support itself, normally by food, for its normal physical action. By abstention from food, this is important. By abstaining from something, it doesn't mean that you have removed, that is not what Sri Krishna is trying to say. So, for example, by abstention from food, it simply removes from itself the physical contact with the object of sense, but does not get rid the inner relation which makes that contact hurtful. So it's not the physical contact with the object of sense that is hurtful. It is the inner uh, relation which of attachment and bondage to that which and dwelling on that which makes it harmful and hurtful. It retains the pleasure of the sense in the object, the rasa, the liking and disliking. For rasa has two sides. The soul must, on the contrary. So what this is what it should not do. Like what should the soul instead do? Instead of uh, having that inner dwelling and relationship. Instead, the soul must, on the contrary, be capable of enduring the physical contact without suffering inwardly this sensuous reaction. Otherwise, there is nivritti, cessation of the object. Vivishya vinivartante, but no subjective cessation, no nivritti of the mind. Okay? So this nivritti of the mind is what we have to do. Not the outer nivritti, not the outer cessation, but the senses are of the mind. But the senses are of the mind, subjective. And subjective cessation of the rasa is the only real sign of mastery. Now, what does this mean? The subjective cessation of the rasa is the only real sign of mastery. But how
Amrita,
is... Yes, go ahead.
Can I just say something that came to
Sure.
mind?
Yes.
That being that this outer nivritti is the outer enjoyment of the senses.
Yes.
But when there is an outer enjoyment of the senses, therefore there is no bliss in the mind. It's a
Yes.
physical thing,
Yes.
not a mind. But in order for the mind to gain mastery over desire, basically that's the bottom line we are doing. One has to actually lose the memory of the rasa. Because when we are fasting, we may be abstaining from food, but we carry the memory of the taste of the food in the mind. Still, we have not been able to gain mastery of the memory. We know exactly what the food tastes like. So even though we are outwardly abstaining, inwardly we are really not abstaining because we can recall that memory, and therefore there is no nivritti in the mind because it causes a restlessness within. Like, when is this fast going to finish so that I can enjoy my food once again? Those kind of thoughts can cross the mind. So there is no inner nivritti. The inner nivritti comes, I think, when you also lose that memory of the rasa, because the rasa has two sides, like he said. One is the capability of enduring the physical contact of the object, and the excuse me, the other is suffering inwardly, that sensuous reaction. That suffering can only be removed when you also overcome the memory that, this is how the food tastes. So you're not bothered, you're not suffering, and there is an inner bliss. And that is, I think, what he's saying. The subjective cessation of the rasa is the only real sign of mastery. Subjective, inwardly. The cessation can
So the
only happen
question,
when the memory
so the
goes
question,
away.
so the question then arises that how does one do that?
Yeah, that can only happen, therefore, excuse me, when one has a complete or even partial influence of the psychic. It cannot happen with the mind. There has to be a psychic
So
influence.
in the yoga of the Gita, the psychic does not come in right now. It comes
Yeah,
in
the
at the end.
Purusha.
Yeah. And so there are other ways of doing it. Sri Aurobindo himself did not do it through the psychic. He did it through the mind. So here, now that's what I want to come to. He did it through the intelligent will and the mind. He used the higher mind, what he calls is the upward, the Purusha, to help him to bring this nivriti of the manas, of the mind. Anuradha wants to say something.
Actually, the whole discussion is going around nivritti meaning bliss. But I just checked
No, it doesn't mean bliss. It means cessation.
cessation, abstaining, withdrawal
Yeah, correct.
in that
It
context.
means cessation.
Yeah, no cessation, no
I
movement of the mind. You're right. There
Can I add
shouldn't be any
something?
Yes, Robin?
Um, I think you hinted at it earlier, is that internally we have to rise up to this higher place inside ourselves. And it's only when we're anchored there that we can really function in the world properly. Because if we don't have that, it's a mental idea. It doesn't actually work. So there has to be a very an energetic centering of ourselves, our consciousness in our higher self. And I think that's what enables us to function in the world and not get distracted by it.
Yes. And that is what exactly that Sri Krishna is saying to Arjun, that use your Purusha, use your will, intelligence to establish yourself in the Purusha. And how do you do it? There are two movements to it: inwardization, and then go up. Put your consciousness up. Let the illumination and the higher will help you, and the Purusha help you to uh, to draw yourself in rather than externalize your being. Right?
Thank you.
Okay. For rasa has two sides. The soul must, on the contrary, be capable of enduring the physical contact without suffering inwardly this sensuous reaction. Otherwise, there is nivritti, cessation of the object, vishya vinivartante, but no subjective cessation, no nivritti of the mind. But the senses are of the mind. The senses are of the mind, they're not of the object. So therefore, it's very important. Where are the senses? They are of the mind. Therefore, there has to be a nivritti of the mind for the cessation of uh, of this of desire. So, but the senses are of the mind, subjective, and subjective cessation of the rasa is the only real sign of mastery. But how? Now, this is very important. But how is this desireless contact with objects, this unsensuous use of the senses possible? It is possible, param drishtva, by the vision of the Supreme. Param, the soul, the Purusha, and by living in the yoga, in union or oneness of the whole subjective being with that through the yoga of the intelligence. So it is, how is it possible? It is by the param drishtva. The param drishtva is the vision of the Supreme, the soul. And how does that happen? By living in the yoga, in union or oneness of the whole subjective being with that through the yoga of the intelligence. For the one soul is calm, satisfied in its own delight. Why? Because the Purusha in its very nature is calm. It is in its very nature satisfied in its own delight. And that delight, free from duality, can take, once we see this supreme thing in us and fix the mind and will on that, fix the mind and will on that, the place of the sensuous, object ridden pleasures and repulsions of the mind. This is the true way of liberation. So it is through the yoga of the intelligence. Because through the yoga of the intelligence, the yoga of the intelligence allows the will and the mind to go upward, inward, and upward to the Purusha, the soul, which is it's by its very nature, the self delight. It has that is in the very nature of the soul. Delight is free from duality. And there, if we fix the mind and will on that, the place of the sensuous, object ridden pleasures and repulsions, the dualities of the mind, they go away, and that is the true way of liberation. Certainly, self discipline, self control is never easy. All intelligent human beings know that. They must exercise some control over themselves, and nothing is more common than this advice to control the senses. But ordinarily, it is only advised imperfectly and practiced imperfectly in the most limited and insufficient fashion. Even, however, the sage, the man of clear, wise, and discerning soul, who really labors to acquire complete self mastery, finds himself hurried and carried away by the senses. That is because the mind naturally lends itself to the senses, because the senses belong to the mind. They're part of the mind. Therefore, it is very easy for the mind to get led away by the senses. That is because the mind naturally lends itself to the senses. It observes the objects of sense with an inner interest, settles upon them, and makes them the object of absorbing thought for the intelligence and of strong interest for the will. By that absorbing thought that of the intelligence and the strong interest of the will, by that attachment comes. By attachment, desire. When you get attached to something, desire. By desire, distress. When you don't get the object of your desire. Passion and anger. When the desire is not satisfied, or is thwarted or opposed. And by passion, the soul is obscured. The intelligence and will forget to see and be seated in the calm, observing soul. Because the intelligence and will forget to see, and they are not seated in the calm, observing soul of the Purusha, and get completely uh, entangled and bound by this attachment and desire, and lose their poise. There is the fall from the memory of one's true self. And there is the fall from the memory of one's true self. So the true self that each of us has is is the Purusha, that is one that is inwardized in the self, in the true self, which is the witness self, which is the soul. And when because of this obscuration that takes place, and this dualities and attachment and desire and passion and anger, and so on that take place, there is a fall from the memory of one's true self, and by that lapse, the intelligent will is also obscured, destroyed even. For the time being, it no longer exists to our memory of ourselves. For the time being, it no longer exists to our memory of ourselves. This intelligent will is totally obscured, and we forget that that is our true self. It no longer, that self, the soul no longer exists in our memory of ourselves. It disappears in a cloud of passion. We become passion. We become wrath. We become grief and cease to be self and intelligence and will. Very, very important. We become that. We identify ourselves. And so we lose the memory of our self, of our true self. We lose the memory of our soul, which we are seated in because of the senses rushing out and getting identified with the objects. And then because of the attachment which comes from desire and always you see that you don't always get what you desire, the obscuration, and then therefore the attachment, and therefore the wrath and the pain and the suffering when you're unable to get what you desire. That happens, and then you lose the memory of yourself, of the soul that you are seated in, and the intelligent will is obscured and destroyed even. For the time being, it no longer exists to our memory of ourselves. It disappears in a cloud of passion. We become passion, wrath, grief, and cease to be self and intelligence and will. This then must be prevented, and all the senses brought utterly under control. For only by an absolute control of the senses can the wise and calm intelligence be firmly established in its proper seat. So only by the control of the senses can the wise and calm intelligence be firmly established in its proper seat. So each time the senses draw us out and we feel these dualities, we feel these that we are being drawn by the desire, raw, anger, greed, all the passions. At that point, we have to remember to draw ourselves back, to get back and seat it back into the inner self, to the soul. Now, whether that is those who are aware of the psychic being, it's far, far easier. But even if you're not, you can still do it with the will and the mind, with the higher mind. If you seat, if you seat yourself and go apart. So there are two methods in yoga: the method of the psychic and the method of the Purusha, which is what he's talking about, the higher mind. So through the intelligent will and the intelligence, this can be.
Amitadi?
This cannot, sorry?
Hello, Amitadi. Can I just share something? Because
Yes.
I got caught in some other thing, but can I just share something that I'd heard in the earlier thing where he's giving a sequence of, what leads to distraction of human mind. So there's a very good passage. I mean, there are just two verses actually in the second chapter of the Gita. And this also comes, so in the first chapter, Arjuna is completely devastated, dejected. In the second chapter, Krishna starts by giving him a perspective. He says, we are the soul ultimately. So what you imagine you're doing is actually not the case in the larger scheme of things. And then at the end of that, there are 18 verses known as a Sthita Prajna. So, because naturally, when he's talking about all these, these high flying ideas and, this is the basis of action and all. So, Arjuna has a natural doubt where he's asked him, then, how do you recognize such an individual? How does he talk? How does he walk? So, Sri Krishna very smartly doesn't give him any visual clues, because visual clues can be, they can be presented and not have any substance in them.
Right.
So he goes to the psychological dimension of that. And in the
Yes.
course, so the first verse that he says there is that he says, Atmanyevatmana tushtaha, one who is content in himself and by himself. So in the context of this Purusha Prakriti, it is really the withdrawal of the Purusha from the movements of the Prakriti that are often in the zone of the unconscious.
Yes.
So this, and then in that, when he's talking about it, he then arrives at these two verses where he says dhyayato vishayan. So you remember in the earlier we had talked about the sense and the sense objects, vishaya. So he says dhyayato vishayan punsa. When you keep thinking about it, sangasteshu pajayate. So it gives a very clear outline of the process, the pathway, literal flow of what leads to a person's destruction. So he says dhyayato vishayan punsa. When you keep thinking, meditating upon it, means you're going on thinking about it, putting your mind or dhi on that. Sangasteshu pajayate. You get attached to that. Then he says sangat sanjayate, attach. Then the more attached you get, then you start desiring it. Kama. Then when you don't get, then when exactly, then when you don't get what you want, kamat krodho bhijayate. Then you get angry that what you're wanting, you're not getting. Krodhat bhavati sammoha. From anger, you come to the state of sammoha. Moha means where there is a delusion. And the prefix sam means there's a delusion in all aspects. You get delusional because you're so angry that you completely can't see things over there. Sammohat smriti viphramaha. When the mind is so delusional, then the facts get, smriti is memory, but in this context, it's all the facts get completely muddled up. Now, if the facts of the matter of the context are muddled up, then your intelligence. So if the basis is all
Actually,
noisy
this
and
is
muddled
coming
like tamas,
up. This is coming up later. We haven't reached this point which you're talking about in this
Acha, no,
chapter.
because I heard the sequence. He mentioned it just a few lines ago.
Yes,
He
but yeah,
mentioned it,
it's coming
and
later.
then he comes to this again. Acha, acha, acha. And
We
then
haven't reached.
just to close, then he says once the buddhi or your discretionary intelligence is corrupted, then
Buddhi
pranashyati. Then
nashat pranashati.
exactly, buddhi nashat pranashyati. That sort of a sequence. So that, yes. Thank you. Sorry.
All these verses I was made to memorized when I was in the Sri Aurobindo ashram by my teacher. So this particular chapter I know by heart. That's the only Sanskrit I know. So anyway, but every time I still remember as an 18-year-old, I used to memorize it every single day. Okay, so um, we're coming to that. We haven't reached there. Where were we? The place of the sensuous object ridden pleasures and repulsions of the mind. This is the true way of liberation. Certainly, self discipline, self control is never easy. I've read that. This cannot be done perfectly by the act of the intelligence itself, by a merely mental self discipline. It can only be done by yoga. Now, this is very important. First, he says that there has to be some sort of self control and self discipline. And then he says that you have to be remember and not forget who your true self is and be seated in that and not get carried away by the cloud of passion. He further goes on to say, this cannot be done perfectly only by the act of intelligence itself, by a merely mental self discipline. It can only be done by yoga with something which is higher than itself. So, by yoga. Yoga means the union with, or, yeah, so with something which is with higher than oneself, and in which calm and self mastery are inherent. And this yoga can only arrive at its success by devoting, by consecrating, by giving up the whole self to the divine. To me, says Krishna. This is the idea. The whole yoga itself can only arrive at its success by the surrender to whole self to the divine. That idea of this of the surrender being very much a part of this yoga. For the liberator is within us, but it is not our mind, nor our intelligence, nor our personal will. They are only instruments. So look at the way that Sri Krishna leads us. First, he says, establish your will. Let your will be firmly established. Let your mind be stilled, seated within. Let your consciousness move up towards the higher Purusha. Let it get illumined by the light of the consciousness through the Sankhya Yoga. Then he says, but that is not enough. By that alone, you cannot read the Param Drishtva. So how can you do it? You can do it through not merely mental self-discipline. Goes to the next level by consecration, by surrender, by offering, by devotion. And then he says, but how? For the liberator is within us, but it is not our mind, nor our intelligence, nor even our personal will. They are great instruments, they're great helps, but that is not the ultimate. It will not lead you uh, to what is the self mastery. It will only aid you towards it. It is the Lord in whom, as we are told in the end, we have utterly to take refuge. And for that, we must at first make him the object of our whole being and keep in soul contact with him. So, this soul contact with the Lord, and to make this the object of our whole being. This is the sense of the phrase, he must sit firm in yoga, wholly given up to me. But as yet it is the merest passing hint after the manner of the Gita. 3 words only, which contain in the seed the whole gist of the highest secret yet to be developed. Yukta Asita Matpara. What is this particular? He must sit firm in yoga, wholly given up to me. What is that phrase? Anurag?
Yogastha kuru karmani.
Purpel.
Yogastha kuru karmani means being established in yoga.
In yoga.
Acts.
Act. So if this is done, then it becomes possible to move among the objects of sense. So if you are um, So, if you are sitting, if you are seated in yoga, siddhir muni ruchate, so that you're able to move amongst the objects of desire, of senses, of the outer world. Yes, if this is done, then becomes possible to move among the objects of sense, in contact with them, acting on them, but with the senses entirely under the control of the subjective self. The subjective self, right? Not at the mercy of the objects and their contacts and reactions. And that self again, obedient to the highest self, the Purusha. So, these are very important things. When as we see that as one progresses in one's inner journey or in one's inner life, when in the beginning one is very, apt to go into one passion or the other, depression or elation, excitement or, this. It's a very, very strong, sorry? Or giving up of, yeah. So these are very extreme reactions. But then slowly one finds that one is not so prone to these things anymore. One has a certain equanimity, certain samatha. That is a sign of the action of the yogic forces. In fact, that is why samatha uh, and equanimity are the first signs of the person uh, who is on the path of yoga, who is practicing yoga. When there is a certain samatha and equanimity and equality in the being, and that is done through this process that is described here, through the yoga of the intelligent will, and then, of course, through that consecration and that uh, yukta asita matparaha, the highest secret yet to be developed, which is he must sit firm in yoga, wholly given up to me, that inner surrender, that inner self-giving, that inner sense. If this is done, then it becomes possible to move among the objects of sense, in contact with them, acting on them, but with the senses entirely under the control of the subjective self, not at the mercy of the objects and their contacts and reactions. And that self again obedient to the highest self, the Purusha. So then free from reactions. So this is the sign. To the extent we are free from reactions, the senses will be delivered from the affections of liking and disliking, escape the duality of positive and negative desire, and calm, peace, clearness, happy tranquility, Atma Prasada, will settle upon the man. So these are the signs of the man seated in yoga, free from reactions. What are the Sanskrit words, the Sanskrit lines there, from the Gita? Um, so that clear tranquility is the source of the soul's felicity. All grief begins to lose its power of touching the tranquil soul. The intelligence is rapidly established in the peace of the self. Suffering is destroyed. Suffering is destroyed. It is this calm, desireless, griefless fixity of the buddhi in self-poise and self-knowledge, to which the Gita gives the name of samadhi. Now, samadhi, again, in the way of the Gita, the way the Gita uses samadhi is different from the way the samadhi is used in the traditional yoga. Anuradha, you want to say something? Put your
Sorry,
hand
you
up.
were asking in that point, no, that verse corresponding to Atma Prasadam. So that verse is the 64th verse of the second chapter. And there it says, Raga Dvesha Viyuktaistu, one who is free from the Raga and Dvesha, attachments and adversities, or aversions, not adversity, aversions. Raga Dvesha Viyukta. Yukta means attached, Viyukta means one who's detached in this context. Vishayan Indriyaish Charan. So this way of the Gita is not by renouncing any of that. And here is where it says, it said Vishayan Indriyaish Charan. While you are engaged in the objects of the senses and you're immersed in that world, still you are not affected by the attachments or the rejections or the aversions. Then he says, Atma Vashye Vidheyatma. So having put your the self-discipline and you put your mind in your own control. Atma Vashye, you're in the control of the self, putting yourself in that position. Atma Prasadam Adhigachati. Such a person will enjoy the bliss of the self, the higher self. So that is the thing. So if I can just
That
add
is the
one other
exact sequence.
one small connection with the Yoga Sutra here. It's a very important
Mm.
dimension of the Yoga Sutra. So the Yoga Sutras, when they talk about our thoughts, they classify them into two, klishta and aklishta. So our thoughts can either be complex or they can be simple. The definition of the Yoga Sutra of yoga is when all these movements of the mind are stilled. So the more we engage in these complex thinkings, they get more and more knotted. And when they get very knotted, they end up being what we call kleshas. And in the kleshas,
Yes.
in the Yoga Sutra, they talk of 5 of them. So the first one is avidya. Avidya coming from an ignorance of what? Of the fact that you consider the impermanent to be the permanent, the impure to be the pure, the non blissful to be the blissful, and the unreal to be the real. So, when the mind is unable to make these distinctions, that is the first level. From that, there is a false sense of ego that comes up. The ego self forms around these false perceptions.
Mm.
And then that leads to attachment. So, asmita is the second one. I-ness. So, the individualization, which is attached to these false ideas. Then comes raga dvesha, because the individual ego is getting formed, then it starts having preferences and aversions. And when it gets anchored on these preferences and aversions, the next step is it is afraid, it gets insecure about its own existence. Abhinivesha. So these are the 5 principal barriers in a sense, uh, but stemming from the thinking that is either complex or not complex. And taking it back to the what are you putting your mind on? So is what you're thinking on, is it a simple pathway or is it a very complicated pathway?
Mm.
The more complicated, the more the filters, the less the seeing of things as such. So just because of this Vishayan, Indriya and Raga Dvesha, so this is a very important connection in terms of
Yeah.
an applied psychology.
So so that clear tranquility is the source of the soul's felicity. Then, free from reaction, the senses will be delivered from the affections of liking and disliking, escape the duality of positive and negative desire, and calm, peace, clearness, happy tranquility, Atma Prasada, will settle upon the man. That clear tranquility is the source of the soul's felicity. All grief begins to lose its power of touching the tranquil soul. The intelligence is rapidly established in the peace of the self. Suffering is destroyed. It is this calm, desireless, griefless fixity of the buddhi in self poise and self knowledge to which the Gita gives the name of samadhi. The sign of the man in samadhi is not that he loses consciousness of objects and surroundings and of his mental and physical self and cannot be recalled to it even by burning or torture of the body. The ordinary idea of the matter, trance, is a particular intensity, not the essential sign. The test is the test of the man in samadhi is what? Is the expulsion of all desires, their inability to get at the mind. That is the man who is in samadhi. The expulsion of all desires and the inability of any desire to get to the mind, into the mind. The test of the expulsion is the expulsion of all desires, their inability to get at the mind, and it is the inner state from which this freedom arises. The delight of the soul gathered within itself, with the mind equal and still and high poised, above the attractions and repulsions, the alternations of sunshine and storm and stress of the external life. It is drawn inward even when acting outwardly. It is concentrated in self even when gazing out upon things. It is directed wholly to the divine, even when to the outward vision of others, busy and preoccupied with the affairs of the world. So it is directed wholly to the divine, even when to the outward vision of others, busy and preoccupied with the affairs of the world. Wonderful lines. So it is very difficult for someone else to know what your mind and where it is directed. So even if you are busy with the outward life of day-to-day life, it is where the inner concentration of the will is and where the inner, what should I say, self-offering and consecration is. So what Mother says, remember and offer, remember and offer. And these are the things that when you start practicing this in the outward, you know, life, that is when you're really doing yoga. Because what is Sri Krishna trying to ask you, Arjuna to do? He's asking him to fight a terrible battle outwardly, full of passion and strength, and yet be in yoga while practicing it. Completely dwelling on Sri Krishna, completely consecrated, surrendered to the divine, keeping the divine consciously in his heart and keeping his whole will centered in the highest plane of the divine consciousness, and yet going into the outward world and doing the worst kind of massacres and fighting with his cousins and brothers and grandfather and grandsires and whatever it is. So it is such an amazing thing that here Sri Krishna is trying to explain. So how does he do it? This is so important. That's why the attraction of the Gita to the modern mind. It is drawn. So what is the test of the man in samadhi? Samadhi, expulsion of all desires, inability to get at the mind. It doesn't mean that you don't enjoy. It is that it is not, you are not subject to the dualities, the passions, the repulsions and attractions, the alternations, sunshine and storm and stress of the external life. You are able to keep a certain detachment and stillness and quietude. It is drawn inward even when acting outwardly. It is concentrated in self even when gazing out upon things. It is directed wholly to the divine, even when to the outward vision of others, busy and preoccupied with the affairs of the world. Arjuna, voicing the average human mind, asks for some outward, physical, practically discernible sign of this great samadhi. He asks Sri Krishna, how does a how does such a man speak? How sit? How walk? And then Sri Krishna answers, no such signs can be given, nor does the teacher attempt to supply them. The only possible test of its possession, of this possession of samadhi, is inward. And that there are plenty of hostile psychological forces to apply it. So what he says is, but the only possible test of this possession is inward, and then there are plenty of hostile psychological forces to apply. What does this mean? Hostile psychological, plenty of hostile psychological forces to apply. What does this mean? Anyone?
The outer shocks of life, the tests.
Hmm?
The
You say?
tests. My voice
No.
is gone. The
Yeah.
tests, the outer shocks of life, the adverse forces.
Uh, yeah. Yeah, it could also mean that, but it also could mean that you see, if you, if these, if there is, because there is no outward test or no outward signs, if they were, you could also be extremely insincere and practice a kind of a pretense thing that, you sit like this, you walk like this, and you see all these imposters and these hostile forces that can latch on to them. So you have to be very careful of these imposters that you meet who are great yogis who wander around. We have quite a few of them in this world. Okay.
Discernment.
Right?
Yes.
There is also
So,
the
yes,
Amitaji is also reference to the Vedic forces at work. So the Vedic
yes,
worldview is that it's all this play largely between the two forces of light and darkness. So these hostile forces are
Cassius.
acting through different human beings, through us, through
Yes,
different temptations. So the panis are the temptation, the vritras would be
yes,
the coverers, the tasyu would be the dividers. So they are
exactly. So
in
those,
action.
yeah, and that action is even now. I mean, these are really real psychological forces even today. They have been named in the Vedas very beautifully and actually curated there. But they are very much what can even attack us today if we are insincere. So he's pointing towards, don't be insincere. Be real in your quest. Don't ask me how to stand and walk and be and sit, and it's not an outer uh, you know thing. Okay. So no such signs can be given, nor does the teacher attempt to supply them. But the only possible test of its possession is inward, and that there are plenty of hostile psychological forces to apply. Equality is the great stamp of the liberated soul, and of that equality, even the most discernible signs are still subjective. A man with mind, a man with mind untroubled by sorrows, who has done with desire for pleasures, for whom liking and wrath and fear have passed away. Such is the sage whose understanding has become founded in stability. So here is the wonderful verse of the Gita that you earlier mentioned. What is that verse in Sanskrit? Exact translation? You're muted, Anuradha. You're muted, Anuradha. You're muted.
Sorry, it starts like this. It goes Sukha dukhe same kritva labha labhau jaya jayau. Okay. Labha. I don't have the whole jaya jayau here.
Sukeshu manudiginamana, dukkeshu
That's the one.
vigataspriya, vita raga bhaya krodha,
Bhaya
stidhira
krodha
muni uchate.
sthitati
That
muni.
is the,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So a man with mind untroubled by sorrows, who has done with desires for pleasures, for whom liking and wrath and fear have passed away. Such is the sage, whose understanding has become founded in stability. He is without the triple action. Triple action. He is without the triple action. Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva. He is without the triple action of the qualities of Prakriti, without the dualities, pain, suffering, grief, joy, and whatever, ever based in his true being, without getting or having, possessed of his self. For what gettings and havings has the free soul? Once we are possessed of the self, we are in possession of all things. So, what is this? Once we are possessed of the self, we are we are in possession of all things, seated within, possessed of the self with a capital S, seated within, possessed of the self, that self which is the portion of the divine in us, the Purusha, the divine, our soul. Once we are seated in the soul, we are completely identified and have what you could call it a psychic being, the soul, the Atma. Then that man is the one who is liberated and is a man that we can say is in samadhi. So a man with mind untroubled by sorrows, who is done with desires for pleasures, from whom liking and wrath and fear have passed away, such is the sage whose understanding has found stability, has become founded in stability. He is without the triple action of the qualities of Prakriti, without the dualities, ever based in his true being, without getting or having, possessed of his self. For what gettings and havings has the free soul? Once we are possessed of the self, we are in possession of all things. And yet he does not cease from work and action. There is the originality and power of the Gita. That having affirmed this static condition, this superiority to nature, this emptiness even of all that constitutes ordinarily the action of nature for the liberated soul, it is still able to vindicate for it, to enjoin on it, even the continuance of works, and thus avoid the great defect of the merely quietistic and ascetic philosophies, the defect from which we find them today attempting to escape. Thou, again put in quotation marks, thou hast a right to action, but only to action, never to its fruits. Let not the fruits of thy works be thy motive, neither let there be in thee any attachment to inactivity. Close quotation marks. You know the verse, Sanskrit? Say it. You're muted.
कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्म फलहेतुर्भुः मा ते संगोस्तु अकर्मणि.
This
So
is one of the most
कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते, yes, you have right only.
right to action. So this is,
Ma
of course, a very
phaleshu.
famous verse. We've all heard it in the Mahabharata that we see on television 100 times. It starts with this verse, the singing of this wonderful verse. So this is what Sri Krishna tells Arjuna there. You have a right to it, but not to the fruits of the world. Let not the fruits of thy works be thy motive. Now, this is a very interesting thing. Let not the fruits of thy works be thy motive. How does that translate in our ordinary practical life, in the morning, in our work? So when you do your work, what do you do it for? It's a question to ask yourself. You do it for the delight of doing it, for the perfection of doing it, for the wondrous idea that you're able to perform, to work for the divine. So this self-delight, when that self-delight of doing work for the sake of the work and not for the sake of the fruits of the works becomes the motive power of your action, you have started on this wonderful path. Started, I'm saying. Okay? And yet he does not cease from work and action. This is the originality and power of the Gita. Then he says, thou hast a right to action, but only to action, never to its fruits. Let not the fruits of thy works be thy motive, neither let there be in thee any attachment to inactivity. Now, this is very important. Tamas. So there is the attachment to rajas. There is also the attachment to tamas, inactivity. What does this mean? Can anyone give an example? Attachment to inactivity, an example of attachment to inactivity? No?
All of us suffer being lazy.
Laziness? Okay, yes. Oh yes. So then you have this false sense that I don't want to get attached to anything. So you withdraw and you get into a sense of a terrible tamas and you think that you're progressing very much. But actually you're doing nothing. You're just withdrawing from the battlefield. This is what happens to Arjuna when he says, I will not fight. Yeah. Yeah. So when you refuse to engage, yeah. So yeah, so these are all ways of the same movement. Okay. So this is what he's saying. Therefore, it is not, let not the works or fruits of thy works be thy motive, neither let there be in thee any attachment to inactivity. Therefore, it is not the works practiced with desire by the Vedavadins. What are the Vedavadins, Anuradha? It is not the claim for the satisfaction of the restless and energetic mind by the constant activity, the
Ah.
claim made
So,
by the practical or the kinetic men, which is here enjoined. Yeah?
yes, this is the whole concept of karma. So
Hmm.
in the division of the philosophies, there is one known as Mimamsa. Mimamsa is about the performance of the different rituals in order to arrive at different states that are spoken of in the Vedas. And
Right.
that is what is normally referred to by karma in the Vedic context, and also what Shankaracharya actually opposes when he talks about, he says, you don't have to do any work at all. But
At all.
what Shobindo says here is that this, I need to do all these performances in order to arrive at all those results. That's the actions that he's talking about here of the Vedavadins.
So
Uh,
therefore, it is
this,
not the
there
works
must
practiced
neither let there
with
be any
desire by the
attachment. Yes.
Vedavadins.
Yes,
Hmm.
that is the one, that if I do this action, this yajna, then I will get this fruit.
The
I will
sacrifices.
get
Yeah.
Swarga, I will get heaven if
Yeah.
I do this, if I do that. So,
Hmm. So it is actually those are done for the desire for fruits. So it's not that
yes,
that he's talking about.
yes,
Therefore, it
yes,
is not the works practiced with desire by the Vedavadins. Note, it is not the claim for the
yeah.
satisfaction of the
Just
restless and
one,
energetic mind. I'm
sorry, if I
sorry?
may just add one other thing. When Shobin was saying this, he's not denying the value of those actions in themselves also. Like these yajnas have, at the material level, they have their benefits.
Hmm.
But when one attaches that if I do this, only
Fruit.
then will that happen, that
Yes. Yes.
outsourcing of the entire internal action to a materiality of expression because of a, again, falsely placed belief in what will give you the result. So
Right.
that is the problematic aspect.
So therefore, it is not the works practiced with desire by the Vedavadins. It is not the claim for the satisfaction of the restless and energetic mind by a constant activity. The claim made by the practical or the kinetic man, which is here enjoined, fixed in yoga, do thy actions, having abandoned attachment, having become equal in failure and success, for it is equality that is meant by yoga. So this is what is what is what is meant by yoga, fixed in yoga. It is not what the Vedavadins are doing for with desire, with the sacrifices and the yajnas, but neither is it the satisfaction of the restless and energetic mind by constant activities, which is the claim made by the kinetic, practical, kinetic mind, which is here enjoined. What is enjoined here? Shri Krishna tells Arjuna, fixed in yoga, do thy actions. Having abandoned attachment, having become equal in failure and success, for it is equality that is meant by yoga. Action is distressed by the choice between a relative good and evil. The fear of sin and the difficult endeavor towards virtue. But the liberated who has united his reason and will with the divine casts away from him even here in this world of dualities, both good doing and evil doing. So Action is normally distressed by the choice between a relative good and a relative evil, and the fear of sin and the difficult endeavor towards virtue. But the liberated who has united his reason and will with the divine casts away from him even here, in this world of dualities, both good doing and evil doing, where he rises to a higher law beyond good and evil, founded in the liberty of self knowledge. Such desireless action can have no decisiveness, no effectiveness, no effective motive, no large or vigorous creative power? No, not so. So he asked this question that such desireless action, can it have no decisiveness, no effectiveness, no efficient motive, no large or vigorous creative power? Then he answers, not so. Action done in yoga is not only the highest, but the wisest, the most potent and efficient, even for the affairs of the world. For it is informed by the knowledge and will of the master of works. Yoga is skill in work. So, what is yoga defined in the Gita? Yoga is skill in works. That all action directed towards life leads away from the universal aim of the yogin, which is by common consent to escape from bondage to this distressed and sorrowful human birth? Not so either. So these are the questions that he raises and then he answers each one of them. But all action, when directed towards life, leads away from the universal aim of yoga, which is by common consent to escape from bondage to this distressed and sorrowful human birth. Is that so? Not so either. The sages who do works without desire for fruits and in yoga with the divine are liberated from the bondage of birth and reach that other perfect status in which there are none of the maladies which afflict the mind and life of a suffering humanity. The status he reaches is the Brahmic condition. He gets to firm standing in the Brahman, Brahmi Sthiti. It is a reversal of the whole view, experience, knowledge, value, seeing of earthbound creatures. Reversal of the whole view. So this reversal of consciousness is spoken a lot by the mother too. So, shall we finish this paragraph or shall we? Yes? Makes sense because otherwise we lose the thought. Yeah, 1 minute. The status he reaches is the Brahmic condition. He gets to the firm standing in the Brahman, Brahmi Sthiti. It is a reversal of the whole view, experience, knowledge, values, seeings of earthbound creatures. This life of the dualities, which is to them their day, their waking, their consciousness, their bright condition of activity and knowledge, is to him a night. So it's such a reversal of consciousness that takes place. When you reach this Brahmic condition, when you are in this in the Brahmi sthiti, then what is day for them is night for you. You know, the whole consciousness gets completely turned. What mother said, one day, moment you turn your consciousness, when the psychic comes forward, when the psychic begins to guide the soul, when the Purusha begins to guide the Prakriti, when yourself, when you are immersed in yourself, in the soul, and you are acting from there, when you are free from the bondage of the dualities of nature, then what happens? Complete reversal of consciousness, this life of the dualities, which is to them, their day, them is an ordinary man, their waking, their consciousness, their bright condition of activity and knowledge, is to the man seated in yoga, a night, a troubled sleep and darkness of the soul, that higher being which is to them a night, to them meaning the ordinary man, a night, a sleep in which all knowledge and will cease, is to the self-mastering sage his waking, his luminous day of true being, knowledge and power. They are troubled and muddy waters disturbed by every little inrush of desire. They means the ordinary man is is a whole thing of troubled and muddy waters, disturbed by every little inrush of desire. He, the sage settled in understanding, is an ocean of wide being and consciousness which is ever being filled, yet ever motionless in its large poise of his soul. All the desires of the world enter into him as waters into the sea, yet he has no desire nor is troubled. For while they are filled with the troubling sense of ego and mine and thine, he is one with the one self in all, and has no I or mine. He acts as others, but he has abandoned all desires and longings. He acts like other beings. There's no difference in the outer actions of such a man, but he has abandoned all desires and their longings. He attains to the great peace and is not bewildered by the shows of things. He has extinguished his individual ego in the One, lives in that unity, and fixed in the status at his end, can attain to extinction in the Brahman, Nirvana, not the negative self annihilation of the Buddhists, but the great emergence of the separate personal self into the vast reality of the one infinite impersonal existence. So he attains to the great peace and is not bewildered by the shows of things. He has extinguished his individual ego in the one, lives in the unity and fixed in their status, in that status at his end. He attains the Brahman, Nirvana, but not the negative self annihilation of the Buddhists, but the great emergence of the separate self into the vast reality of the one infinite impersonal existence. Such subtly unified, such subtly unifying Sankhya, Yoga, and Vedanta is the first foundation of the teaching of the Gita. It is far from being all, but it is the first indispensable, practical unity of knowledge and works, with a hint already of the third crowning, intensest element in the soul's completeness. And what is this third crowning, intensest element in the soul's completeness? Divine love and devotion. Yeah. 1 minute of concentration. Good day, good evening, hello, whatever part of the world you're in. So I thought we would take the last 2 pages before we start the next chapter, because we had read them a little hurriedly and also they're very important. Um, so I think we'll start from page 101, the last 4 lines. The sign of the man in Samadhi. The sign of the man in Samadhi is not that he loses consciousness of objects and surroundings and of his mental and physical self and cannot be recalled to it. Okay, so you go to the Yoga of the Intelligent Will and you go to the paragraph that begins, the sign of the man in Samadhi. Sorry? Yeah, so you don't worry about what your the page number, because your book is different. Go to the Yoga of the Intelligent Will. And then go to the sign of the man in Samadhi. Yeah? Got it? Vibha?
Yeah.
The sign of the man in samadhi is not that he loses consciousness of objects and surroundings and of his mental and physical self and cannot be recalled to it even by burning or torture of the body. The ordinary idea of the matter, trance, is a particular intensity, not the essential sign. The test of the man in samadhi, who is doing in yoga, the test is the expulsion of all desires, their inability to get at the mind, and it is the inner state from which this freedom arises, the delight of the soul, gathered within itself, with the mind equal and still and high poised, above the attractions and repulsions, the alternations of sunshine and storm, and stress of the external life. This delight of the soul gathered within itself, self-delight, is one of the most important signs of a man in samadhi, and a way not being caught into desires and attractions and repulsions and so on. It is drawn inward even when acting outwardly. It is concentrated in self even when gazing out upon things. It is directed wholly to the divine, even when to the outward vision of others, busy and preoccupied with the affairs of the world. It is drawn inward even when acting outwardly. This is an extremely important sentence. How can one act outwardly and still remain indrawn? So the first way of doing that, perhaps, is to keep one's consciousness directed upward, above at the Sahasrara chakra, or inward, whichever one is easier, in the psychic center. But more important than the placement is the concentration in the divine, the idea that the mind is focused on the divine doing all actions and not oneself. Not an understanding that it is Prakriti that does the action, and not in any case, it is the Prakriti and the ego that attaches itself to Prakriti that acts. So to be able to dissociate from Prakriti and the ego, one needs to position one's consciousness in a different, higher, deeper place. So it is drawn inward even when acting outwardly. It is concentrated in self even when gazing out upon things. It is directed wholly to the divine, even when to the outward vision of others busy and preoccupied with the affairs of the world. Arjuna, voicing the average human mind, asks for some outward, physical, practically discernible sign of this great samadhi. He asks, how does such a man speak? How sit? How walk? No such signs can be given, nor does the teacher attempt to supply them. For the only possible test of its possession is inward, and that there are plenty of hostile psychological forces to apply. Equality is the great stamp of the liberated soul, and of that equality, even the most discernible signs are still subjective. A man with mind untroubled by sorrows, who has done with desire for pleasures, for whom liking and wrath and fear have passed away, such is the sage whose understanding has been founded in stability. He is without the triple action of the qualities of Prakriti. So he is without, please note this, he is without the triple action of the qualities of Prakriti. What is the triple action of the qualities of Prakriti? Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva. So he's without the triple action of the qualities, the three gunas, without the dualities, ever based in his true being, without getting or having possessed of his self. For what gettings and havings has the free soul? Once we are possessed of the self, we are in possession of all things. And yet, he does not cease from work and action. There is the originality and power of the Gita, that having affirmed this static condition, this superiority to nature, this emptiness even of all that constitutes ordinarily the action of nature for the liberated soul, it is still able to vindicate for it, to enjoin on it even the continuance of works, and thus avoid the great defect of the merely quietistic and ascetic philosophies, the defect from which we find them today attempting to escape. Thou hast a right to action, but only to action, never to its fruits. Let not the fruits of thy works be thy motive, neither let there be in thee any attachment to inactivity. Therefore, it is not the works practiced with desire by the Vedavadins, it is not the claim for the satisfaction of the restless and energetic mind by the constant activity, the claim made by the practical or the kinetic man, which is here enjoined. Fixed in yoga, do thy actions. So fixed in yoga. Now, this fixed in yoga is very important. How do you fix yourself in yoga? Well, the practice of it is more important because the Gita is a very practical work. And unless you practice it, it has, the whole value of the whole experience is very, very important. Fixed in yoga, do thy actions. Having abandoned attachment, having become equal in failure and in success, for it is equality that is meant by yoga. So what is meant by yoga? Equality. Action is distressed by the choice between a relative good and evil, the fear of sin and the difficult endeavor towards virtue. But the liberated, who has united his reason and will with the divine, casts away from him even here in this world of dualities, both good doing and evil doing. For he rises to a higher law beyond good and evil, founded in the liberty of self-knowledge. Such desireless action can have no decisiveness, no effectiveness, no efficient motive, no large or vigorous creative power. So these are questions that such desireless action, which is founded in the liberty of self-knowledge, which is equal to both evil and good, found and rising to a higher, does it have no creative power? Because it is so equal and so, in a sense, way detached. The answer is not so. Action done in yoga is not only the highest, but the wisest, the most potent and powerful. It is not impotent. Does not lack creative power. It is most powerful, most potent and efficient, even for the affairs of the world. So even in the affairs of the world, any action we do in yoga, done in yoga, that is fixed our consciousness above, in remembrance, in offering, in surrender to the divine, and fixed inwardly, that is, we are doing it from an inner poise, that action has a much higher potency and power than any action done outwardly. Not so action done in yoga is not only the highest, but the wisest, the most potent and efficient, even for affairs of the world. For it is informed by the knowledge and the will of the master of works. Yoga is skill in works. So this is important. What is yoga in the end? Yoga is skill in work. So this wonderful blending and this relationship between yoga and work is here brought out by Sri Krishna. And he tells Arjuna, yoga is skill in works, but all action directed towards life leads away from the universal aim of the yogin, which is by common consent to escape from bondage to this distressed and sorrowful human birth. So he says, but you will say that all action, directed towards life leads away from the universal aim of the yogin, which is by common consent. What is the universal aim of the yogin? To escape from bondage to this distressed and sorrowful human birth. Again, Sri Krishna says, not so, no. Not so either. The sages who do works without desire for fruits and in yoga with the divine are liberated from the bondage of birth and reach that other perfect status in which there are none of the maladies which afflict the mind and life of a suffering humanity. So, not so, he again says, the sages who do works without desire for fruits are reach that perfect status in which there are none of the maladies which afflict the mind and life of a suffering humanity. So here he, each he sort of he explains to Arjuna each of the various questions and issues and says, no, this is not it. Does this mean this? No, it doesn't mean this. What does it mean? So the status he reaches is the Brahmic condition. So the status a man in yoga or the yogin reaches is the Brahmic condition. He gets to firm standing in the Brahman, Brahmi Sthiti. And what is that? It is a reversal of the whole view, experience, knowledge, values, seeings of earth-bound creatures. This life of the dualities, what are the dualities that he's referring to here? This life of the dualities? Life and death, pain and suffering and joy, everything that is dual in its nature, light and darkness. So this life, because the whole of life on earth is based on this dual. So this life of the dualities, which is the ordinary person, their day, their waking, their consciousness, their bright condition of activity and knowledge, is to him, the yogin, a night, a troubled sleep, and darkness of the soul. That higher being, which is to them, the ordinary humanity, that higher being, which is to them a night, a sleep, in which all knowledge and will cease, is to the self-mastering sage, his waking, his luminous day of true being, knowledge, and power. They are troubled and muddy waters, disturbed by every little inrush of desire. They, ordinary humanity, are troubled and muddy waters, disturbed by every little inrush of desire. He, the sage, is an ocean of wide being and consciousness, which is ever being filled, yet ever motionless in its large poise of his soul. All the desires of the world enter into him as waters into the sea. Yet he has no desire, nor is troubled. For while they are filled with the troubling sense of ego and mine and thine, he is one with the one self in all and has no I or mine. He acts as others. He acts as others, but he has abandoned all desires and their longings. He attains to the great peace and is not bewildered by the shows of things. He has extinguished his individual ego in the one, lives in that unity, and fixed in that status at his end, can attain to extinction in the Brahman Nirvana, not the negative self-annihilation of the Buddhists, but the great emergence of the separate personal self into the vast reality of the one infinite impersonal existence. Satchidananda. Such subtly unifying Sankhya, Yoga, and Vedanta is the first foundation of the Gita. It is far from being all, but it is the first and indispensable practical unity of knowledge and works, with a hint already of the third, crowning, intensest element in the soul's completeness, divine love and devotion. So, chapter 11, Works and Sacrifice. Before we go to that, would you like, anybody has any questions, reflections, or thoughts?
When you are meditating and you try to meditate on Sahasrara, the mind actually tends to become blank, and that gives a very eerie feeling of exactly what are you? And are you a puppet? Are you, what is it which is happening? And not as if you get some, to do any work, you have to again use the brain as an instrument.
Yes.
It feels
So it is not that you meditate when you're working, but if you are meditating, then one can't work, because as you said, your mind becomes blank, and it is that that's why it keeps saying, it keeps talking about this standing firm in yoga. So it is, you have to shift your consciousness from the ego or from the outer being, from the outer mind, body, and vital, to whatever is more natural to you, either the inner self, which is the inner mind, vital, and the psychic around, go within, or go above. The above is the Purusha, and within is the psychic being, which is the part of the Atman. So you can decide where you want to station your consciousness, but do not station it in the outer being, is what here Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna. Do not station it in the ego. Do not station it in the mind. Do not station it in the vital being. Do not station it in the mental being. Station it at a higher level, which means that your eyes are open, that you are acting, you are speaking, but your consciousness is inwardized and upwards.
Time when I was really disturbed about the work I had to do and away from what I thought that I was supposed to be doing. And then I read a story where there was this monk who was asked to do the most menial work of cleaning kitchen stuff and everything. And others would laugh at him and say, what have you, sacrificed all this for to do this work? it's this, and that is the time when my ego got me down, that whatever work's coming in front of me, I have to fix my, take off my ego and fix my consciousness and leave that work at its best. And just do it with that awareness, that consciousness, and I actually feel happy about the day. What?
Yeah. So there are many stages and steps in this.
Amita, I had a request. Is it possible to sum up the chapter that we read in a few major points?
I'm not good
Or
at
maybe.
Shibani is very good at summaries. Such
Oh,
Shibani.
great.
This is exactly what I was trying to say, that I am going to attempt to summarize. So I just want to be clear, I understand. But please correct me if I'm not putting the right thing. I think the major thing that the yoga of the intelligent will, from what I've understood, is firstly that one of the key points is shifting from an external renunciation to inner renunciation, which means that it goes beyond the idea of physically abandoning work is not the true meaning of renunciation of work. It means the inner renunciation of attachment to the work. So it requires an equality of mind. Second point I feel is the Buddhi yoga as the core discipline, which means that actually you're aligning the will to the soul's discernment, which is guided by the divine. So the purified intelligence actually becomes the instrument for choosing the right action without personal desire. The third point I feel it's trying to say is that the karma should be in the light of the self. So action should not be for the sake of reward or result, but as an offering, like a yagna. And so the doer is not the ego, but the universal self. The fourth point I feel which has come out is that the equality is the sign of true yoga and not any other physical attempt that we try to separate a person who's reached that level. And the fifth I would feel is that Sri Aurobindo is combining knowledge, Gyan and will karma, and therefore towards the end he says he has started the union of the Sankhya and the Yoga. So that is this chapter brings out the first attempt of the union of the Sankhya, which is the knowledge, and the Yoga, which is the will or the karma. And what I feel, these points bring out the key things for me. So, I mean, feel free anybody to add or, you know.
Yes.
Thank you. That's a big help.
So you might want to give us your summary at the after chapter worth summarizing, because there are some very good points which are do with practice. And that
Correct.
is really important chapter. It's not just philosophy or intellectual things. Sri Aurobindo here has culled out of the discourse between Arjuna and Sri Krishna the very, very important points of practice of the Sankhya yoga, of the yoga of the Gita, and so on.